Hello there, woman beings. Welcome to another amazing episode of the Woman Being Podcast.
Hello.
I'm here today with Kellyanne and Kelly, and also the lovely Rebekah LaRobardiere. She is a sex and relationship coach, and she is going to dive into the nitty-gritty of sex and everything that comes along with it. So we're really stoked to talk to her today. Let's get started. Welcome to the Woman Being Podcast community,
where we explore thoughts and opinions
and have the freedom to change our minds.
Without expectation or judgment,
we will hold a safe space and support each other
as we navigate together in the form of feminine.
All right, so we are here today with Rebekah. Thank you for being here, first of all.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Of course.
Our pleasure.
Pleasure.
Our pleasure. Our pleasure to talk about our pleasure.
Okay. Are we going to make dumb jokes like this the whole time?
Yes.
Maybe. I don't know. So, to start out, we would love to hear a little bit about how you got into the field of sex and relationship coaching. What drew you to that? Why are you doing this?
Okay. So I get that question often because you don't find too many sex coaches.
Yeah.
And so for me, it was pretty much my honeymoon.
Started back
Because I grew up, did everything right and pure to the extreme. Because if I'm going to be pure, I'm going to be the purest.
Mm-hmm.
I will be the most whatever.
Yeah.
And on our honeymoon, I anticipated the fireworks, the perfect, God blessing it, and it's going to be amazing. And not to say that God didn't bless it, but sometimes we have to partner with God and have information, be taught, have a skill set, and not just sit and wait and say, okay, God, you do this, and I'll show up. That's not a great partner. So, after our honeymoon, I decided it's my job to start educating people. I'm one of 5 girls who were youth leaders, and anyone that was going to get married, I was like, let's talk. And I'd talk whatever they needed. And kind of going after that because realizing I didn't have all of the information that I needed to thrive, that sent me on this trajectory to be able to help myself and everyone else. And so that's a very short version of how and why.
Yeah.
Yeah. That sounds familiar.
Yeah, it does. I feel like that's a very common story, unfortunately, especially in Christian conservative communities where it's only abstinence teaching, and if it's abstinence, then you don't need to know anything, right? And no one is taking the responsibility,
because if you know, you might not wait.
Yeah. And then for some reason you'll lust. And I think I loved what you said when we met earlier this week. You said typically purity is confused with ignorance. Was it that?
Or innocence.
Innocence is confused with ignorance.
Yes.
I feel like that's something we see a lot in church culture. But what are some of the most common issues that you see women walking into your office with? Or maybe not issues, maybe obstacles, opportunities to educate themselves.
So we've got a wide gambit. Some of them is they just have no desire anymore, or they never really did, and now they have children, and now it's just a chore. So I get quite a bit of that. I get others that, because they grew up in the purity culture, which the heart behind the purity culture, I believe, was for people, and the heart was gold. The mechanism to getting there and the way that people were treated in that is very detrimental. And so I get a lot of women coming out of that, and even men just trying to embrace their sexuality, their femininity, because everything for women is supposed to be shut down. right? So shut down your emotions. You're too much. You're this, you're that. And so we shut it all down to be able to fit in a man's world. And when we fit in the man's world, we become task-oriented instead of relationship-oriented. And everything needs to be measurable on my to-do list, which is very masculine. And there's nothing wrong with it until we shut off our feminine side, which is our balance. And when we don't embrace all of us, we will never be able to have the thriving sex life we long for, because it requires you to be fully you. So did that answer the question?
Yeah, I mean,
I feel like I would love to hear, if you can, share like a bit more about specific like issues, or like those, like what causes people to even want to go to sex therapy or not, or sex coaching. You know, like there's people who like have the lack of desire. Things are becoming a chore. What are some of the other things that you see?
Potentially not having had intercourse after multiple years of marriage.
Wow.
They'll come see me for that. Just not connecting with their spouse and they're to a point where if something doesn't change, and ultimately their sex life is the reason. But if something doesn't change, we're not going to work. But we use sex as a means to an end. So, okay, if we want to talk about sex, we have to talk about the trust issue, the intimacy, your perspective of your body, because we will only allow someone to love us to the extent that we love ourselves. And if I think I'm not attractive, but my husband's telling me, I will invalidate everything he tells me because you're crazy, because it doesn't line up with my belief. And so rewiring neural pathways and your belief system and figuring out, because everyone will come in with an excuse, a reason as to why it's been okay. And so it boils down to, they're all excuses. Why are you not thriving? Why are you not where you want to be? And it's being willing to put in the work. And oftentimes it's the soul searching. And that's what brings people in. Okay, you can get us where we've been unwilling to go.
Yeah. Well, and it's almost like sex life is kind of like your symptomatic.
Yes.
But there's always like the deeper stuff underneath.
Yeah.
All of that.
And I do have a few people that come for technique, because we are, the little teaching that we are given, it's very linear.
Yes.
It's back and forth, which sex is not. Sex is fluid, and it's full body, and it's circles, and it's roundabout. And so here, I'll give you a tip.
Yeah, for sure.
One of the tips I'll give people, I'll tell people, I was like, okay, so if you're on top, sit and write coconut with your hips instead of going back and forth. You're sitting there because you then get all of all the movement on all the parts instead of just like back and forth.
Yeah.
Like now you've got like the sides, you're kind of hitting the whole clitoris and all the legs that are internal, not just the external one. And so it's very easy, very practical, but people are like, what?
Yeah.
So
realizing there's more to just like, even just what like media has told them sex looks like.
I'm gonna have to file that.
Yeah.
Be like, James, later.
Let's try the coconut.
Let's try the coconut.
You can pick any word, but that's just
I have a follow-up question. So you said like women, we shut down our bodies, and I've done some inner healing work and some body movement practices to try and loosen some of those things up. But my question is, what are ways that manifests for women? I've heard like women tend to store trauma in their hips. We are seeing medical conditions now like vaginismus. But like, what are some other ways that women can commonly manifest shutting down their body, their sexuality, and their emotions.
Your libido from stress is gone. If you don't feel safe, and whether that's emotional, whatever, financially, anything, your body goes into fight or flight mode, and your sexual organs are not necessary to keep you alive, and so all your blood flow goes to all of the other essential organs. And so when you're stressed, that's part of the reason you're
Not into it.
not
Yeah.
into it. It's
That's
because
fascinating.
I like fight or flight.
Well, and it's like when I took a course on fertility awareness, medical management, and they talked about like your body in stress actually won't let you get pregnant, and that makes a lot of sense because your blood flow is like other places. Like I'm prioritizing other things.
Like we gotta survive right now. We do not have time
it is
for a
not
baby.
time to make a baby.
But then, like in like extreme situations, I've heard that sort of the sex drive can pick up because it's like if we don't reproduce, the human race will die, and your body is that real?
So that's it.
Like COVID
That's
baby syndrome.
slightly. Well, COVID baby syndrome is we are bored.
What else do we have to do?
We've watched all of the shows. Now what? And I see you a lot. So
Sure.
that made accessibility.
Right.
It ups your chances.
Sure. Sure. But
And-
reproducing the earth because there's a like major like I've heard
A
during
pandemic.
wartime
Yeah.
or after wartime. No, I guess the baby boom happened after the war. 'cause
Yes.
people were
Yeah.
like,
All the
we
men
don't
came back.
All the men came home, and
Yeah.
here I am.
I mean, I imagine, I don't know how much of it is scientific and how much of it is like, well, the men were gone. now they're back. And we're like, let's start the family, you know? Like all these women were here holding down the fort, and now they're like, let's go.
Which that makes me curious because of COVID and everything being shut down. Are intimacy issues increasing because now people are home? And so they're with their people all the time. And so I feel like issues might come more to the surface, or like we're seeing like people are being more intimate and, making that more of a priority because people have time.
Yep.
Yeah.
So you have your extremes on both sides, and it is very much like some people took this opportunity as an opportunity, like it is like, okay, great, I get to work on us, I get to have more time with you.
Yeah.
Instead of the others, they're like, what can I do? I can't stand you. Okay, we're done, because they don't know how to engage with each other on a friendship level.
Yeah.
So-
I imagine that it exposes the cracks and also the good things within relationships when you're in such an intense quarantine with only one another. Like if there were things that were breaking that you were ignoring because you were busy, then those things are gonna finally break if you don't have the tools to work through that.
Well, and definitely like stress, as you mentioned, plays a huge role, and like busyness plays a huge role. But what would you say are the greatest barriers to intimacy and connection with couples as they like try to have a healthy sex life or are working towards a healthy sex life?
So some of the biggest hang-ups would be time and intentionality, I would say. Time is a choice, so is intentionality. But it's when you're dating, you have all the time in the world and you have my undivided attention.
Yeah.
And once you get married, you forget that you have to keep wooing each other. You have to stay curious, because when you are dating, you're curious. You ask all the questions. Tell me everything. I want to know your favorite color, your favorite food. I love how your hair does this. Whatever it may be, you notice and care about everything. When you get married, you keep each other in this box, and this is where you stay. And it doesn't leave you room to grow or change, which makes things uncomfortable then, because that's not who I married. In reality, it is who you married. You just had the pretty package, because many people don't allow the growth and the change in themselves or the other.
Yeah, I think that sometimes people get into the thought that the person that they married is going to stay the same the whole time, and they're not going to grow and change together. And it actually reminds me of a conversation that we had in a recent episode talking about relationships with family members and sort of tensions within that. And I think that with family, it's easy to put your family members into a box and say, well, you're this because you were this when we were little, or you were this when I was growing up, or whatever. And so when you marry someone, they're your family now. They are connected to you and they've committed to you. And so I think that there's that same idea of like, well, you are this because this is what you were before, so this is what you'll always be. But people are so fluid and they change and they grow and mature. And
that's interesting you say that, because my husband, he'll say like, oh, I went into this marriage thinking like I had found you and you were who you were going to be, and I had come into the marriage thinking he would like grow and change, and that like we would both become better versions of ourselves throughout time. And I think like when we got married, he was just overwhelmed with how much I was changing and growing. And to be fair, I was like 18 years old, so I had a lot of growing and changing to do.
Yeah, for sure.
And he was also very young, 20, he's growing too. And then I was surprised that he wasn't like necessarily pursuing change in the ways that I was. And we were kind of like, what are you doing? And what are you doing? And so it's been like an interesting experience of like growing together and learning the new person. And he has grown. He's just not, it's just, we've done it in different ways.
Different.
Yeah. And so, managing expectations for sure.
Oh, yeah.
And, loving each other in the midst of, awkward growing pains and awkwardness. It's just all awkward in general.
Yeah, I
Absolutely.
mean, it's definitely a process. I actually had the opposite thing, because I feel like in Christian culture, there's so much pressure on, are you equally yoked?
Yep.
Are you, like,
This is the right person that God has laid out for you.
Exactly. And I'm like, well, if this is the person that I'm choosing forever, I have to make sure. Me and my husband dated for 4 years, which was good for us.
Yeah.
But and I think I put so much pressure on the you will never change. And it's like, and now on the other side of marriage, undoing that almost anxiety of fear of growth and change, because I am radically different from when we first got married, and so is James. And that's actually brought new life into our marriage and our relationship, because there is kind of a constant discovery. But if you don't create that space, it's almost like a codependency of like, you can't change, or like you shouldn't. Yeah. And like when you allow that, there is this new discovery that I feel like goes on.
That's interesting, because the tension for me was, no, I have to keep like growing into this like, super righteous human, like I'm ascending into,
Perfection.
Well, not perfection,
eventually.
Sanctification, right? Like I'm ascending to my sanctification, and we must both be on this like trajectory together. But I mean, the journey is different, and the speed is different, and the areas of growth are different, and equally yoked, I think oftentimes gets translated to like the same person with the same values.
Yes. Yeah.
But like equally yoked to me means like complementary, that we both have different strengths that we bring to the table, and now it means that to me now, after 7 years of marriage and like learning and understanding this other person that, I'm connected to forever. Anyways, I actually, just to like switch gears back, because I wanted to go back to our conversation more about like young married women entering into the marriage bed, figuring out their sexuality. When I first got married, it took us a long time to figure out the orgasm. And we did a ton of research online, and like we bought books, and we worked really hard on it. And I remember reading so many articles and like books that were just like, yeah, most women just don't orgasm. And that was kind of how sex was set up for me. And a lot of literature and things like that is like, yep, some women don't, and it's normal. And so I think that was good in like dispelling the shame of not having the most amazing sex life right off the bat. But on the other hand, like, now that I'm older and we've been married for a while, I'm like, that's actually kind of sad that is the norm. And I wondered if you had thoughts on that. Like, should that be the norm? Like, why is that such a that's a pandemic. That's a problem for female sexuality as a whole, I would say.
So my thought is that as long as you have the parts, there is no reason that you are not able to. Let me put an asterisk. It is a learned skill set. Some people come by it a little more naturally than others, like an artist. Some people have to work at it. Some people it just flows. I think an orgasm is very similar. We also base our experience of an orgasm like a man's, where it spikes and plummets. Ours are vastly different, but we actually have to learn how to have an orgasm. And they can be extended, they can be multiple, but it takes time, energy, and effort to figure it out. Yes, there's people with trauma, there's stuff in your head that blocks everything down here, so then you're not going to. There's a lot of shame around it, there's a lot of guilt, there's preconceived ideas, there's control issues, there's, you name it.
Yeah.
There are obstacles to be overcome. But so far, I believe that as long as you have the parts, you can have an orgasm.
It's possible, people.
Ladies, just like forget those articles that tell you can't orgasm, because you can. It's possible. Might need some work, but that's okay. It's worth it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that people probably get in their heads that, like, if something doesn't work one way, then it's not going to work any way at all.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, sex is something that is so, like, a vast thing. Like, there's so many, like, ways to have sex. There's so many aspects of sex and sexuality and, like, the sexual experience. And so, like, to say, like, definitively you cannot orgasm seems very limiting on something that is so expansive. And I think that especially in Christian culture, a lot of it probably stems from the idea that you can't talk about it. And also that sex in a lot of Christian spheres is more a duty than a time for intimacy and connection.
Be fruitful and multiply.
Well, and I don't think we like talking about pleasure in the church either. Like, I don't think happiness or, like, pleasurable experiences are something that we have indoctrinated.
Oh, no, because, well, it's the whole poverty mindset. And so if you want to be great in God's kingdom, you're a servant of all, which does not include pleasure. And to be the least of these, and you give everything away. It's not about you. And so we grow up in that culture already believing that our sexuality belongs to our husbands. It's not ours. And so now let's add the pleasure element, which doesn't even cross many women's grids because it was never an option. My sexuality is not mine. My pleasure is not mine.
It was so enforced for that to be just, like, stamped out. And so how do you access something that you've neglected for so long?
You didn't know it's there.
Yeah.
Well, I think even, like, I went into marriage with the expectation that I'm going to be the sexiest wife. We're going to have sex every night. It's going to twice a day even. You know what I mean? Like, I had no idea, but I was like, I'm determined. But, like, you actually can't, like, determine yourself into a pleasurable sexual experience. I've learned you actually have to relax and, like, enjoy the moment and not. It's not just like a task to be done. So I figured that out, but went into that with all these expectations, and then it didn't work right away. It was actually kind of painful the first time, and painful the next few times. And our honeymoon was kind of a mess, a weird, awkward, beautiful mess. And I felt like it took me a lot of time after that to get over, like, the fear of an unhappy experience. Because sometimes it was like, sometimes we'd have a better time and sometimes, but it was like I never really fully landed. And then I started getting UTIs and, like, that wasn't, like, creating a positive. We just had sex and now I'm sick kind of thing. So definitely, like, overcoming that like fear and some of the, I don't want to say trauma because that seems a little extreme, but like, you know, trying to figure it out. And it's like, my advice for any married couples who are as determined as I was is take it slow. You've got time.
Relax a little.
Don't
Let yourself heal.
Bunch of new positions on day 2 like I did.
Oh, yeah.
It was a mistake.
No.
And I was like, oh, this is just uncomfortable and pokey. And I don't want to stop.
We were like a different position every day. We got to try something new every time because that's what apparently you do on honeymoons. But it's like, just like take it slow. Like you're learning. And it's a learning process. So anyways, that's just a little nugget from Kelly Werner. You're welcome.
And that's the hard thing for a lot of people. They go in and disappointment derails you. And there's nothing wrong with an expectation, but it needs to be realistic. And very few of us had someone say, hey, let's be realistic here. This could happen. And I actually probably had someone, and I totally didn't listen. I was like, I'm going to be the exception to the rule.
Yeah.
And it wasn't.
Yeah. Well, and that was part of the thing is that I waited. I wore my Virginity Rocks t-shirt. I believed in the pure mindset. You know what I mean? And to me, that meant I was going to have the best sex life ever. So it was like super disappointing when we got there.
And you
we're
still
like,
might.
No, I think I do now. But at the time, it was like, like everything's falling apart.
But the funny thing with that is we all think that it's going to be perfect on the wedding night instead of, oh, I have a lifetime to perfect it. And if you perfected it, or we had perfected it on our honeymoon, the rest of our life is going to be boring, right? And so it's the process and the journey to get there that actually makes it that much better.
Yeah.
And so lowering the stakes, but always engaging.
Yeah, it's definitely a big part in building that marriage relationship. It's not just learning how to communicate, how to manage your finances together, how many kids do we want. It's also how do we navigate the marriage bed? How do we have sex? How do we feel good with this? How do we communicate in that realm as well? Yeah. But so Rebekah, you are not just a sex coach extraordinaire, but also a Christian.
I am.
And so you have seen firsthand the ways that things like purity culture and the church's mindset around sex have impacted women and men, have impacted a generation, really, it feels like. And so I think a lot of the purity culture that we see from the church comes as a reaction to sexualization in popular media.
Yeah.
And so I'd love to hear some of your thoughts about how the church has reacted and maybe even some about the ways that culture portrays sex and sexuality.
Okay. So I'm going to do backstory.
Yes,
Do
please.
it.
Yeah.
So the whole thing with the purity movement in reaction to the reaction part is what always gets me. I am not a procrastinator. Whenever I was in school, I'd get an assignment, it's done the next day. I don't, even if I have 2 weeks, it's done. And it's one of those things that I don't want to miss out on something because I haven't prepared. Or if something comes up, I'm free because I can. And the reaction that we do instead is like, hey, you want to go hang out? And you're like, no, I have this paper. Now you backtrack and you can't do what you want to do because of the reaction. And so if you can, ultimately, that whole story is if you build a foundation that has information that is beneficial and use it as a tool opposed to a control. Because ultimately, church is, the heart is there, but they use fear and control to get what they want, to keep us pure, to keep us right, to stay in line. Yeah. It's fear and control. It's not about the relationship, even though at times they say it's all about the relationship. they want their convictions to become our convictions. And so when we are unwilling to, they spoon feed us. And this is what it is, and this is what I believe. And then we go out into the world, and there's so much out there, and no one's controlling me. And so then we get to do all these things because you've never been given the information that you actually need to stay pure. Because they weren't keeping you pure, they were keeping you naive. They were keeping you in a box, in a bubble, so that they didn't have to ask themselves the questions. So they didn't actually have to deal with the awkwardness. And so as long as I can control you here, you don't have to worry about anything here. But the time comes when you get to react, which is the detrimental part. Tie it back around, the reaction. And so if we give information at the appropriate time, inform with real information that's beneficial, and it's all about the appropriate time, you will stay pure, you will stay innocent with all this information if it is given in a way that actually protects you and sets you up for success, opposed to I'm protecting you so I keep you locked in a box.
Well, I feel like the mindset is so often like, this may, like, I'm putting fear in you now to give, like, to benefit you later. But I think what we're learning now that, like, this whole generation of children who grew up in purity culture are speaking out is that the fruit of that fear has been, like, unhappy sex marriages, especially in women, like, vaginismus,
messed up pelvic floors.
Lack of education about sex as a whole, people, not knowing what a yeast infection is or not, or and having serious...
Not even knowing how to put on a condom.
And so if, like, our mindset is, like, I'm going to harm you now for the benefit of your future, like, that seems like backwards thinking. And I think as we look at the, trail of destruction that we've left, we can pretty easily say, like, something needs to be changed. We have to reconsider the way we're doing this because it's actually not helping our Christians have happy, healthy marriages. It's creating, like, fear, like that fear that we put in you then is still there in the bedroom now. And that's not the kind of marriages that we want our congregation to have. That, like, Christians should be having
the best sex.
Yeah, we should.
I agree. But it goes with what's modeled to us. So you grow up with, hypothetically, two parents that are not affectionate. Mom does these things. She's not really a wife. She's a mother, and she doesn't have a social life. And there's no attraction between mom and dad anymore. And so the desire for marriage, the way that it was modeled, is not what you want. All the fun in movies or whatever is in the dating and engagement and the wedding day. And so this is where, and so we put in so much time, energy, and effort there because after that, it's a ball and chain and all of these horrible perspectives that people keep perpetuating. And so one of my things is I really encourage couples. I was like, I don't care if you're a physically affectionate person. Like, what do you want to model to your children? You're not having sex in front of them, but you are affectionate. Like, you'll rub each other's back or shoulder, come up behind them, show them that you actually love each other and that you still have fun. Because otherwise, it's modeled that once I get married, the fun is over. And so we have sex beforehand because at least it'll be fun, and then afterwards, it's no good.
It's then an obligation, a duty.
And so just shifting the perspectives of what do we really want to model, and if I'm not enough to change that, I'll change it for my children because I don't want them in a marriage like that.
Yeah, I think that example really can be so impactful.
And just one thing, that wasn't my parents. My parents were affectionate. In case they listen.
I mean, I grew up in a divorced home, so I didn't, obviously my parents were not affectionate to one another because they were divorced. And I didn't really have examples of like good marriages until I was in high school and I started going to friends' houses whose parents were Christians, and seeing their example. And I actually have a very vivid memory of a friend of mine's parents in their kitchen. Like, one of them had just come home and they just started dancing together in the kitchen to no music at all. They were just so excited, like, that they were together again. And I looked at them and I was like, this is beautiful. And this is something that I would want too. Like, this is possible for me because I just saw examples of divorce over and over again. But like, that's a huge impact on a child, is to see the love and actual a real cultivation of that love that maybe starts in privacy, but like it's such a big love that it pours over into everything else. And so your kids are going to see it, and your kids' friends are going to see it, and your friends who come over are going to see it and stuff. And so I think that's super valuable, and that also helps to, like you're saying, like break chains of what the example was given was. Because when I was little, I always told my friends that I was going to get divorced one day because everyone in my family was divorced. So I was like, this is what happens. So those examples get carried on, even if you don't realize it.
Yeah. And I love what you said too about if I use fear and control, then it's to protect you. But purity without a choice involved isn't necessarily purity. Like, and we see that in the Garden of Eden. Like, God said, like, don't eat this tree. It will, the day you eat it, you'll die, or paraphrasing. But Kelly said in one episode, she's like, God didn't say you couldn't look at the tree. God said you couldn't touch the tree. God didn't say you couldn't smell the tree. Like, and God gave the choice. Yeah. And I think that's so important. But we, in purity culture, we, put a fence up. And
it's the whole flee temptation.
Yes.
And then you have a culture that doesn't know how to manage themselves because they've never had to teach themselves or manage themselves because, I'm being tempted.
Yeah.
And so, yes, there's a difference in fleeing temptation and looking it head on and saying, okay, what am I going to do about this?
So with that in mind, with talking about, fear, control, God said don't eat the fruit, so we're not going to look at it or touch it, and we're going to pretend it doesn't exist. With that mindset, we've obviously seen it's not working. It hasn't been working. But how do we start cultivating a healthy conversation in church and Christian culture about sex? Because there have been some sad attempts.
Yeah.
How do we actually move towards something better that actually is effective?
So ultimately, like off the top of my head, is you've got to start small. Like, find your people and start you don't want to do a soapbox thing or this is a cause, because you want to keep it fluid, because sexuality and conversations are going to be fluid. And with that, there's this freedom that it brings that broaches the awkwardness, because it is awkward for a lot of people and it's taboo. And so when you create this fluid, free conversation around sex and sexuality that is not labeling it one thing or another, but cultivating curiosity is ultimately what you want to do in the church. And oftentimes curiosity in the church has not been encouraged because it's harder to control you if I let you ask questions. But ultimately, we've come to the point where it is all about relationship, and it's about our connection between ourselves and spouse and ourselves and God, and going forward, or even relationships. Like, we are all sexual beings, period. There's nothing you can do about that. Like, you walk into a room and you are still a sexual being.
Yeah.
And so recognizing and owning it, like, it's calling this bottle green. It is. There's no taking the green away. Well, hypothetically. You could, I'm sure they'll bleach it. But you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, that won't change. And so we're trying to pretend you walk in a room and say, I don't have a zit on my face. And you've got this huge zit. And it's pretending it's not there when it's there.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just allowing those conversations to be broached in a way that just says, hey, what do you think? And why do you think that? And like, start a conversation that doesn't say, well, I don't agree with you. That's a horrible idea. Like, oh, that's intriguing. Tell me more. And how did you come to that conclusion? Because my experience of it is so different. And like, allowing your perspective and your perspective and yours all to create a broader perspective and a picture that you all have a piece of.
Yeah. I'm curious, do you think that we should like get our pastors to start preaching about sex from the pulpit? Like, should we make it normal within the church? What are your thoughts on something like that?
That's a great question. My initial thought is not a full sermon on sex, because there could be a lot of things related to sex, but I don't want to sit in a room full of people, probably, and my pastor's telling me about, well, this orgasm, you know, and it's just like very, maybe it'd be fine, but it would have to be tied into, okay, the trust issue. Oh, the intimacy issue.
Yeah.
Not issues. The trust, the intimacy, the control, the abuse, the trauma, the whatever. And not like, okay, let my pastor give me technique ideas. Because they're two different things. Like, if you are, a pastor is there to teach and guide you in your spiritual life. Yes, in normal everyday life, great example for you to see. But unless he's an expert, I don't. Or she. Yep, sorry. If they, whoever they are, is talking about sex, I would want the backing, because most pastors have some sort of schooling on what they're teaching.
That's actually an interesting question, because I feel like pastors, mostly males, do speak into sex a lot, I would say, as a whole, especially youth pastors. But what you're bringing...
what not to talk about. What not to do.
Yeah, what not to do. But what you're bringing up, too, is like, these people aren't sex experts.
Yeah.
These people haven't studied how to do sex. They haven't studied abstinence as a practice, or the effectiveness of it, or, like... So, but there's sort of like this, oh, you're a pastor, you're not an expert on all, you have to be the expert on all things, spirituality, relationships, etc. And so we have all these mostly white men stepping up and telling everybody, the whole congregation, women included, how to manage their sex drives, when that probably doesn't make sense at all. Like, we need to be having like if the church wants to foster healthy sex relationships in the church, maybe they need to be bringing in people who have that background and experience to truly speak into that. And it doesn't necessarily have to be like from the pulpit as a whole. I would say, like, maybe sex
classes
could be less taboo as a topic on the pulpit. But what you brought up is very interesting that I had never thought about. Like, we're all learning from a bunch of pastors, mostly male, who aren't sex experts.
Yeah.
Like, let's just point that out. Like, why are we addressing all of our, like, giving them all of our attention and all of our hedons?
Well, I think that's kind of the issue with pastoring in general. There are a bunch of mostly guys
We'll just say mostly.
that have gone to seminary which I grew up in the Methodist Church, so I'm most familiar with the Methodist process, and they're spiritual leaders, but they haven't really studied spirituality. They've studied theology. So they have the knowledge to back up what they're saying, but now they're smart people playing counselors. And they haven't necessarily studied emotional health or sexuality or all the real life things. And now I know there are exceptions to everything, but I think that's just my beef with pastoring in general. It's like, you are a spiritual leader and someone to help influence, pastor the flock, lead the flock, all the things, but that doesn't mean you're the expert.
Right.
Well, it's learning to stay in your lane. Let's be
Yes.
honest.
Yeah.
So I'm a sex and relationship coach. I'm not going to coach you on how to run your business
Yeah.
because that would not be beneficial. So I know who to send you to, but like, it's people trying to be more than they are to create value for the people around them.
Yeah.
When in reality, if you could stay in your lane, you would actually bring so much more value and creating a network of all the people you need. Like,
Yes.
And not
okay, this is
misleading
what.
people or
and
giving
not-
empty promises
Yeah.
that you actually can't deliver on, essentially.
Which is very detrimental. So we've already it was already detrimental, forcing the whole purity thing. And yes, I think purity is awesome.
yes.
Detrimental. And now I'm trying to give you advice because that one didn't work, which is just as detrimental.
Yeah.
And like you get people that come, kind of off topic, but and the husband struggles with porn. And the wife goes to the pastor and he tells her it's her fault because she's not giving him enough sex. And that's the biggest load of crap that I have ever heard because he came into the marriage with baggage. That was his issue then, and it's still his issue now. And if she doesn't want to have sex with him because he broke her trust, that's a problem.
Yeah.
And no, just giving him sex is not going to fix this problem.
Yeah. Well, it's like, sorry, broken trust doesn't equal super horny. That's not not interested.
Yeah.
Well, and how many married couples do, like, say they're having a sexual issue or multiple issues and sex is one of the symptoms of that or whatever. They go to their pastor's office and their pastor gives them the best advice he can, and it's
And
probably
prays for them
pretty
and
terrible.
sends them on their way.
But it's like, we need to normalize referrals.
Yeah.
That is my
Yeah.
conclusion from this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I guess with all that being said, I'm curious, like, what would you say to the young married or the young about to be married woman when it comes to cultivating a healthy sex life in their marriage?
Ooh, I have a course.
Oh!
2 months before and 3 months after marriage
Oh.
to prep you. And then when things didn't end up like you anticipated, we walk through, you talking, we'll talk it out. And then you don't feel ashamed to tell people, because what if they think I made a mistake? Which is very common, and you didn't make a mistake. And so the 2 months before, 3 months after is pivotal in not creating bad habits and patterns in your sex life and the way you think, the storyline you tell yourself about sex, your spouse, or did I do the wrong thing?
Very cool.
Wow.
So
So,
people,
you don't have to come see me, but
tune in. You can go see Rebekah. You can take her course. But also, like overarching, like, what do you wish young women were being taught? And, like, what are the things you wish you knew or someone young would know ahead of time?
So this will be controversial for many people. I would strongly encourage young girls to take ownership of their sexuality and figure themselves out. The best gift you can give your husband on your wedding night is say, hey, this is what I like. Know who you are, and then give that to your husband on your wedding night.
Yeah.
And it'll be pretty hot, and he'll think it's even more sexy.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I mean, I think that there's always I mean, you talk about it being almost like a gift to your husband on your wedding night.
It's
which
a
I
gift
think
to
is
you,
interesting.
The gift
Yes.
that keeps on giving.
But like, I think it's also important to remember that if you don't have that you can still build from there. You know, your wedding night
Absolutely.
might be messy and weird
Oh,
and
it
uncomfortable.
probably still won't
And
be
it
what you
still will
anticipate,
be.
which is why you
Yeah.
get me 3 months after for the
Yes.
next 3 months.
And so like there's so much room to grow, which we've talked about like already, is that there is a process.
Yeah.
You're not going to be this amazing sexual
Goddess.
goddess the moment that you sleep with your husband for the first time. And but you can set yourself up in a position
Yeah.
with what you're talking about of knowing yourself more, which knowing yourself in general is a gift to your husband, is going to build your relationship, knowing who you are, knowing being your own person and having your own ownership over who you are and over your body
Yep.
is invaluable. Because if you go into a marriage without that knowledge, they're going to be along for the ride of that figuring out even more. And so it sounds like it can make things a lot easier.
Yeah, and it is like it's embracing the process, just like you said, because you don't want to have arrived on your honeymoon.
Yeah.
You want things to look forward to, but setting the expectation to something that's a little more realistic, and not setting up the whole youth group for failure on their wedding night because did we miss something? So I've used this little analogy before. So God created all of us, right? And he created women with a clitoris, and the only purpose is pleasure. Like there is no other purpose, and it's a gift. And so if he gave us a gift, why would we say it's bad? Yes, appropriate times. Yes. But it's kind of slapping God in the face would be my thought, to be like, nope, it's all bad. Don't do it. Because he wanted us to enjoy it. But if a woman realizes that she has power over her body, she is in control, men lose control. And you actually become a team and partners, opposed to I'm the head.
Yeah.
And so let's keep women here. Don't let them experience all the pleasure they can, or know that they actually have power to do it themselves. And so it's one of those things that is not talked about in the church, because then they lose us, because the fear's not going to hold us anymore.
I think that there's so much nuance within that, and as the church loves to do so often, they say a blanket answer, this is it, the end. And that can be super harmful, especially when things like masturbation and watching porn and being sexual are very normalized for men. It's sort of like boys will be boys, this is just what they do, and like you women are gonna just have to like repress as much as possible because you aren't sexual. And then you're going to get a husband who's addicted to porn because that's just what they do. And so you now have to satisfy that need for him.
Which is also crazy to me, too, that we don't talk about that more in the church, because I know plenty of women who have had porn or masturbation challenges that they've had to work out in their life. And like that feels like it's something that should be more normalized as well. Like, just throwing in that little side tangent.
Yeah, no, I've talked with you ladies about this. I grew up like fully believing that men had porn problems and women didn't. And men were visual and women weren't. And that was why, we have to dress up and cover ourselves because they're going to see us and immediately lust after us. And so it wasn't until I was like a young adult that I realized, oh, there's plenty of women out there that have struggled with porn and things like that. And I was like, oh, I thought that was just like a weird sex addiction problem that like very few women ever encounter or whatever. But it's actually, I just want to say this. it happens a lot. And so if you're out there struggling with that or dealing with that, like, don't feel alone. And there's actually probably a lot more women around you that have that issue than you realize.
And it's on the rise.
Yeah.
It really is. Because it does. It makes you feel good in the moment. And so your body gets this rush of hormones, and when things aren't going well, at least you know you've got one thing.
Yeah.
It doesn't make it necessarily okay, but it's okay, what is the real root to the problem, to the struggle? Because some people don't see it as an issue. And you know, where is your heart motivation? What's your why? And then own it. Because that's ultimately with all of sexuality, all of what I do. I try never to have the right and wrong, the good, the bad. It's very fluid, and there's no one size fits all. Like, what would work for you wouldn't work for you, or for me, and so it's each person has their own journey and their own process to discovering themselves. And being okay with messes is huge. Like, in a relationship, we all make messes, and messes aren't always bad. Like, you spring clean, you make a bigger mess, but afterwards things are purged and you actually have the space that you want and love, but it never made the mess bad. And so looking at it in a way that, okay, we're always growing, we're always moving forward, and we get to, okay, this was helpful, this wasn't, and being okay with that instead of, well, I said this and now I'm stuck here. You are never stuck, and you always have an option.
Yeah, I think that's a really amazing message that, you know, so many women need, so many men need, especially within the church. So, Rebekah, we're coming to the end here. We really appreciate you sharing all about sex and relationships and intimacy. The one thing that we still need to know from you is, what does the phrase woman being mean to you? It's an open-ended question we ask all of our guests, and we want to know.
Okay, so I was actually pondering this morning. I was like, what do I want to say? So I was laying in bed, and I was thinking that there's just this woman that's fully encased in her, and she's just there, like fully present, fully being. Like, there's no hiding, there's nothing blocking her, there's no like cockiness. It's just this confidence. I'm just there. And you know, it was she's prominent, but not like abrasive. Like, you notice her, but she's not intimidating, but she stands out. So that's ultimately what woman being is to me.
I love that. I feel like that there's so much holding opposite things in the same hands that I feel like are a part of womanhood. And I feel like that really beautifully encapsulates that idea of the tension and the balance that we can carry. So, Rebekah, do you have any resources or any things that you would recommend to our woman beings out there? And also, how can they find you? What are your plugs? How are they gonna know about you? Because everyone's gonna want to know after listening to this.
Great. So books, Getting the Love You Want by Harville Hendrix, and it's not about sex, but has everything to do with it. Because if you aren't getting along or understanding or constantly triggered by your spouse or partner, you're not going to want to have sex anyway. So deal with this stuff. And if you want a how-to book, I really enjoyed The Joy of Sex. It has pictures, it is graphic, but it feels clean. Like, it doesn't make you feel slimed like some books can. And then if you need a lube, go on Amazon and get fractioned coconut oil in the pump bottles.
Wow.
Oh.
They are so
okay.
handy. Just put on your bedside stand and it's a pump and
Yeah.
it's perfect.
I should
I like
probably
it.
do that.
Do you have a favorite vibrator?
Oh, I sure do. Which one?
I don't know which one.
Yeah.
You tell me.
You tell
I
us.
honestly don't know the names of them. I have them.
Oh.
I can send you a link for a couple.
Yeah, sure.
Please
Why
do,
not?
actually. I'm always looking to add to my
But
collection.
one of them you have to at least try 3 times because it is a little intense. But it's very fun. But give it time. Takes practice.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
And then how can the people find you?
You can find me on my website is rjlcoaching.com or Instagram and Facebook, RJL Coaching.
All right. And also, we know that for the Redding, California locals, your husband owns a business here that many people have probably heard of. If you want to plug
Yes.
that.
He owns Theory. We are co-owners, and we are opening shop number 2 right on Hilltop, 3 doors down from Sprouts.
Nice.
Nice.
It looks
And near
real nice over
Chick-fil-A.
there. Yeah, it's going to be next to Chick-fil-A.
Yeah.
It's going to be next to
So.
Sprouts.
If you don't know, Theory is an amazing coffee shop, and
Yes, it
probably
is.
it's my favorite in Reading. Yeah,
Yeah, totally.
it definitely is. So, Rebekah, thank you again for talking with us.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for all your amazing wisdom and input and knowledge about sex and everything that comes along with it. We love that you are working towards destigmatizing it some, and especially being a voice within the Christian world. I think that's really amazing and important and needed. Woman beings, we would love to hear what you thought of this episode by giving us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You can also talk to us about it on Instagram at Woman Being Podcast. And we have our website, womanbeingcommunity.com, where you can also listen to any of our podcast episodes. Or you can check us out on YouTube. We have all the things. So we want to talk to you and hear what you thought. Do you feel like you have a whole new perspective on sex now after listening to this episode? We want to know. And we will catch you guys next week. Bye.
Bye.